together, to put our minds together, to work together for one collective purpose. God, we ask that you would give us ears that listen, minds that comprehend, and are able to respond with good reason and objective goals that we may reach for, and we believe that we shall attain. And so, oh God, we continue to look upon, to think on our minds to those right now who are suffering, those that still have no shelter, those who are housing insecure, those who are food insecure, those who are utilities insecure. And we ask God that you would give us the opportunity to change a system that has left them in that place. So now, God, we ask that you would bless our time together. And it is in the name of Almighty God that I do pray. Amen. Sylvia, tell me how many are logged on right now.
21.
All right. Then we can introduce ourselves because we said just beyond it on this Zoom call that we will introduce ourselves if we have less than 25. And so, Sylvia, could you conduct introductions? And as we do that, everyone, please just simply say your name and what organization you're representing. If you're not representing an organization, just simply say concerned citizen. Sylvia, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Pastor Manning. Sylvia McKenzie, Justice and Beyond co-moderator, with a host of others. And I'll pass it to Mr. Ben.
Ben Gordon with Pax Christi, the National Catholic Peace Organization, Veterans for Peace and Advocates for Louisiana Public Health. And I will pass it to Ernest.
My name is Ernest Johnson. I'm a director of Ubuntu Village and a pillar of Justice and Beyond. And I will pass it to Alice.
I'm Alice, and I'm a concerned citizen. And I'll pass it to Arissa.
Marissa Arend with Community Mediation Services in Trinity Church and a pillar for Justice and Beyond.
Richard Sachs, Pillar for Justice and Beyond Community Mediation Services and Trinity Episcopal Church. I pass it to Dennis Knowles, please.
Mr. Dennis.
Yeah, I got you now. Yeah, I'm moving too many buttons. Dennis Knowles, also known as Akinchile Sayero Shosi. I'm with Louisiana United International. And I'm going to pass it on to Gina Womack.
Thank you very much. I'm Gina Womack, Executive Director and co-founder of Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children, and I will pass it to Myron.
Martin Miller with the Ubuntu Village and Justice and Beyond. I'm going to pass it to Miss Bethany.
Hi, Bethany Boltman, New Orleans Musicians Clinic and Assistance Foundation, and a pillar of Justice and Beyond. And I will pass it to Seema, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Seema, aka Corrine Brown. I'm representing the Mind Body Service Collective, my private practice. I'm trying to get started.
Thank you, Seema. You see someone you could pass it to?
Sorry. Let's see. Pass it to Corinne Barnell.
Miss Corinne.
Yes.
Miss Corinne, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Corinne Barnwell. I'm not turning on my, I'm not going to let you all watch me for a minute because I'm eating supper in front of the television. I mean, in front of the computer.
That is fine.
Anyway, I'm a faithful member of Justice and Beyond.
We're so glad to have you here. Can you see someone to pass it to?
I'll go. My name is Raymond Sweet. I'm with CASA New Orleans. We serve children in foster care's best interest. And I'll pass it on to Terry Van Brunt.
My name is Terry Van Brunnen, and I represent the Heart of the Matter, St. Tammany. And I pass it on to the Reverend Jim Vanderbilt. Reverend Jim.
Reverend Jim Vanderweel. I work with Together Louisiana, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans with Climate Reality New Orleans and Louisiana Environmental Action Network.
Reverend Jim, thank you. Would you pass it to somebody, please?
Troy Bechet.
Thank you, Reverend. I am having connectivity issues, so my video is off. I am Troy Bechet with the Center for Restorative Approaches. And if you can help me out, Reverend Manning, I'm not exactly sure who hasn't gone.
All right, Sylvia, would you call on somebody?
Yes, sir. Patrick Bryant. Oh, wait, he's still connected. Miss Susan Hudson.
Hello?
Go ahead,
Miss
Miss
Susan.
Susan.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I joined late. I'm not sure what was the question.
Introductions, just say your name and who you're representing.
Oh, hi, I'm Susan Hudson. I'm a candidate for sheriff. Thank you.
All right, and pass it to somebody, if you can see the participant list.
Pass it on to Mr. Pat Pastor. He's on.
Pat, would you introduce yourself, who you're representing?
Bryant, Louisiana Caribbean Connection.
All right, Pat, do you see anybody you can pass it to? Sylvia, call on somebody, please.
Miss Becky.
Hey, I'm Becky Merriweather, with St. Charles Avenue Baptist Church, St. Charles Center for Faith and Action, and Together New Orleans. And I will pass it to Betty DeMarco.
She may have been having trouble, so I will pass it to Rahad.
Hi, Rada Yaramelli with Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. I will pass it to Rachel Gasser.
Hi, I'm Rachel Gasser. I'm the policy director for the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights.
All right. Could you pass it?
And I'll pass it to who hasn't gone? Well, I'll just go ahead and pass it to Ariel.
Hi, Ariel Test from the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, and I will pass it to Ann Meyer, who I think hasn't gone.
I have not gone. I'm Ann Meyer, a concerned citizen from the Lower Ninth Ward, involved in a number of organizations, and I'll pass it to Judith Bigpen.
Hi, I'm not sure who's not gone yet. I'm a concerned citizen and I dropped my information in the chat.
All right, very good. Sylvia, is anybody else?
Mr. VP Franklin.
Hello, good evening, everyone. This is VP Franklin, and I am working on the Justice and Beyond Forum coming up on December 4th at Ashe on gun violence, restorative justice, and reparations. So I hope to see you there. And I'm looking at, because the reparations funds need to be used to protect our children. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, VP. And it's good to be able to hear and see you tonight. Sylvia, is that everybody?
No, Miss Valerie Jefferson should be on. Valerie.
Well, I'm gonna call it there because it seems like we picked up more people. So we're gonna go ahead and start. So let me just lay down some general things. Hey, Valerie, you want to say hello to everybody? I think you're on mute.
Hello. Okay. Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Valerie Jefferson. Glad to be here. I'm the president of ATU Local 1560. We are the operators, streetcar operators, van operators of our TA in New Orleans. We keep New Orleans rolling. Hey.
All right. Thank you, Valerie. All right. Just a few preliminary housekeeping matters. Just to let you all know, if you're new to Justice and Beyond, please give us your contact information. If some of you have already, please send it to Brooke Randolph, who you will find in the participant list. We want to make sure that if you are not getting our newsletter that we send out on a weekly basis, updating you about upcoming forums, that you will get that if you give us your email address. Send it to Brooke Randolph, please. Also, please know that the governing model of Justice and Beyond is that we are governed by our pillar organizations. Those are organizations that have signed up to be a part of the vision casting, a part of the planning, a part of the forum planning for Justice and Beyond. We have our pillars meeting every Tuesday at noon on this same link. If your organization wants to be a pillar, wants to be involved and engaged in Justice and Beyond, as we seek to fight systemic institutional racism and amplify the voices of brown and black people, please join us. We'd love to have you in doing that. Please know that we came up with that model about 4 years ago now in order that we might ensure that Justice and Beyond is not strictly led by one or two people, but led by a host of many different organizations, as a coalition should always be. Again, also too, my name is Reverend Gregory T. Manning. I'm the pastor of Broadmoor Community Church, where no perfect people are allowed, and one of the co-moderators for Justice and Beyond, along with Sylvia McKenzie, Myra Miller, Trevor David Bryan II, as well too, who is our youth co-moderator. Tonight's discussion, as we discuss how do we protect our black kids? Black children are one of our vulnerable communities or populations that are left in vulnerable positions, especially during such times of crisis and catastrophes as Hurricane Ida. And so we want to ensure that they are not left out of the discussion. And what do we do now, and how do we ensure that they were taken care of properly during Hurricane Ida and other events? And so our lead on this discussion tonight is Mr. Ernest Johnson of Ubuntu Village. Let me also say this as we begin this discussion. Discussions like these can have a lot of emotion and passion centered around them or as a part of them. One of our core tenets at Justice and Beyond is that we would always ensure that this is a safe place, whether we're meeting in person or whether we're meeting on this platform, that it would be a safe place. That means we govern ourselves by love, respect, and by peace. You may not agree with what someone else says, but we do always want to make sure that we are respecting one another and being peaceful to one another. We always want to let you know that while we don't want to, if things get out of control, we will utilize the mute button or take the opportunity to disconnect you from the call. That being said, too, if anyone's causing a disruption, such as Zoom bombing, we will shut off the meeting promptly, and we ask that you would log in again to join us for the rest of the discussion. With that said, and no further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Ernest Johnson of Ubuntu Village to introduce our guest panelists for tonight.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I would just like to say a few words about Ubuntu Village. We are an organization that work with families and children that are impacted by the juvenile justice system. And we also believe, we have a philosophy that we believe in humanity with the reflection that I am because we are, and that all of us are in this together. And with that, I would like to introduce sort of my mentor and someone who brought me into this work, Gina Womack. Gina, you can give a few words about your organization before we get into the questions.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Mr. Johnson, for saying those kind words. I never knew you thought of me as a mentor, but I appreciate that. And vice versa, because definitely have been mentored by Mr. Johnson. So I love that. I'm Gina Womack. I'm Executive Director and co-founder of Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. We are a statewide membership-based organization. So for the last 20 years, this is our 20th anniversary, would have had a big shindig had Ida not came and interrupted that. We've been working with families and youth for the last 20 years, holding systems accountable, hearing from families, doing leadership development for youth and families. And I'm really excited. Thank you all for inviting me, although this is family and I don't get to all of the meetings, but this is definitely home for Flick. So thank you for allowing us to come tonight.
I see. And also Ariel Tess from Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, another organization that we've done some outstanding work. Just recently, we partnership with them to pass House Bill 216 that eliminates fines and fees across the state of Louisiana. Welcome, Ariel.
Thank you so much for having me and for having LCCR. Did you want me to say anything about LCCR?
Just give us an introduction.
All right, great. LCCR is the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. We're a nonprofit law office that represents kids in the juvenile justice system and represents men and women who had been sentenced to life without the possibility of parole or are facing that. We also tackle systemic issues that criminalize mostly poor Black youth in the first place by working on policy issues.
Thank you. And I would like to note for the audience, we did invite Mr. Keyshawn Webster, the director of the Juvenile Justice Intervention Center. I don't think he's joined us as of yet. He said he had a conflict, but he would join us. So at any time he joined us, I would just prompt we have some questions for him that we will allow him to answer. And with that, I'll just move on to the questions. And the first question I have for Ariel and Gina is, how do we protect Black children impacted by the education and the youth prison system, not only in Louisiana, but in Orleans Parish particularly?
Go ahead, Gina.
That's directed towards Ariel, right, Ernest?
Yeah, it's a multi-question. It's for Ariel and Gina, so either one can answer it. And I think Ariel referred to you, Gina.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. So yeah, thank you for that question. What I would like to start out by saying is that I'm a mother. I'm a mother first, and I don't know that I always put that forward or even people even think about that from my perspective. So my children need the same things that all children need. And that's one of Flick's tenets, and we fight for, the youth that are most vulnerable, young people who are impacted by the education system and the prison systems, right? And so what I would say to that is that we just really need to remember that all children need to be made whole. They need to be heard, understood, so we need to listen to them and then act based on what they need. Flick has a 3-point platform that addresses poverty, mental health and medical assistance, as well as equitable education. So young people, those are like the top things that young people really need, but it breaks down and it goes individually, right? And so we have to be able to listen to young people from their individual perspective, hear what it is that they need, and be able to provide those services. Interesting enough, the education system has its preamble that it's supposed to provide education based on individuality, right? So looking at a system that looks at what every young person needs and be able to provide them with that kind of educational opportunity. So if young people, and I always love when we were working to prescribe to the PBIS, the positive behavior interventions, because it states that young people have problems, they're not problems, right? And so first and foremost, we need to not see young people as problems. We need to not have zero tolerance policies. I'm always so thrown off at the fact that we actually have zero tolerance for children when, that's what we need the most. We need tolerance, understanding for young people, as well as the juvenile justice system, which was set up in understanding that young people needed a different type of services from the adult system. So in addition, the New Orleans Children, Youth and Planning Board has put together a children plan. So it also addresses a lot of those issues. I can look at the link and drop it in the chat box. For those of you that have not seen it, you can take a gander. But it's not that complicated to know what Black and brown children need and need what all children need: love, respect, understanding. They need access to services when parents find themselves in trouble. Instead of being referred to the families in need of services that's connected to the criminal justice system, we need services in our community. We need to, again, listen. Everyone always says those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. That's great. We don't want it as a buzzword, right? We want to be able to actually hear that and then act upon that. And so when families and youth are saying what it is that they need from their mouth, then it shouldn't be just, oh, okay, we got that, and then there's nothing that's done about it, right? FLIC, again, has been around for 20 years. I've been at this work for more than like 24 years and hearing from families, and they've said constantly, which is why we have a 3-point platform. And so we need to do those things, right? It's not that complicated if we were really interested to make sure that all children have the opportunity to grow and thrive. And if you're concerned about the children, you're also concerned about their parents, their guardians, the people that are in charge of taking care of them. So we need to make sure that the families are healthy and happy as well.
Thank you. Ariel, would you like to chime in on that, or could we move to another question?
It sounds like you'd like to move on. I would just like to add to that, saying that those are, I think that Gina's absolutely right. Those are the things that kids and their families need. What they don't need is a prison system for children, and a prison system that doesn't rehabilitate them, that traumatizes them, that doesn't serve them. And then when it's clear that the children haven't received an education, when they haven't received trauma counseling, failure to hold the adults in those systems accountable is the problem. And we can't keep sending children into prisons for failures that the adults haven't been able to turn around.
Thank you. And that leads me into the question. There was an article in Illuminator over the last month, and it says Juvenile Justice Intervention Center evacuated its youth to an adult facility. Is this illegal, and why? Ariel.
Yes, it is illegal. It is also wrong. And I think what we know is from those articles and from what we've learned is that the city developed a plan long before Hurricane Ida. And that plan was an agreement with the Department of Corrections to bring kids to prisons for adults and to place kids in the custody of the Department of Corrections, which runs adult prisons. That's a violation of the Louisiana Children's Code, which mandates that kids adjudicated or being prosecuted for juvenile offenses not be placed in adult facilities. So not only is it a violation of the Children's Code, which says how kids in custody have to be treated, and they have to be in facilities that are licensed by the department, by DCFS, but it's also a violation of the Louisiana Constitution, which says that anything that impacts children requires special juvenile proceedings, which this was not something that followed the special juvenile proceedings that are required. I think it's really important that we talk not just about the violation of the law, but how this violates our sense of common sense, decency. We've had 16 years since Hurricane Katrina to come up with a better plan. And the plan that New Orleans had was to send kids to adult prisons. Prisons are scary, prisons are traumatic, prisons are built for grown-ups, and kids shouldn't be in prisons. So this is a violation of the law, and it's also something that we shouldn't stand for as a community. We need to protect kids. Thinking back to the first question you asked, what do we do to protect kids? We certainly do not stand by while they're sent to prisons during a pandemic and during a hurricane when their family is separated from them.
Thank you. And I'll piggyback on that with another question to you that also was in that particular article, is that juvenile detention centers in the path of Hurricane Ida evacuated. Where did those youth relocate to, and how was it that Orleans Parish kids wind up in adult, assuming they all wind up in an adult facility, but yet other detentions in the path of Ida were sent to other youth facilities?
So I can't speak to all of the internal processes of the facilities across the state. What I can say is all of the other juvenile facilities that evacuated, and I believe that there were 5 of them, evacuated to facilities that were only for children. The Juvenile Justice Intervention Center is the only facility that evacuated children to an adult prison.
Thank you. Gina, the Juvenile Justice Reform Implementation Commission has reconvened after being absent for years. What are some of the current reforms they are working on, and who's holding them accountable?
Thank you so much for that question. So yes, the commission finally reconvened. It definitely wasn't out of an altruistic, process. Flick worked with allies. We filed a lawsuit that named Flick to the commission. And even after that happened, it took another year to name us as vice chair and demand that there were meetings that were going to be held 4 times a year, and put in, thanks to work for other allies like LCCR, we have a good chairperson and Representative Duplessis. So where we are at this point, like we have to meet 4 times a year, which we are about to hold our 3rd meeting coming up October 19th. There isn't honestly, like there's this whole process of getting folks to understand the commission's duties, why the commission exists. And for those of you that do not know, in 2003, lots of allies came together and passed the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2003. We lovingly refer to it as Act 1225. The Juvenile Justice Reform Act Implementation Commission, I will say JJRAIC from here on out to be quick, is to oversee the implementation of the reform, right? And so that encompasses a lot of holding systems accountable. And you ask the question, like, who holds them accountable? So what I have learned over the last 24 years of doing this work is, and I know folks already know that, the people who have to hold systems accountable are the people who are most impacted by what the fight is. So the community needs to be able to understand what's happening and hopefully get together and collectively hold systems accountable, because the system is not going to be accountable to do all of the work itself, unfortunately. And I ignorantly thought, like, after the reform was passed, okay, well, we did this and it's law, everybody's going to follow the law, especially since that is what they make our young people do, right? They have to follow the law, be strict about it, and they are held to the highest level of accountability. But who holds the system accountable? And again, it has to be us, and we have to understand the laws and what it means. And it's a continuation of what needs to, really happen. So right now, the meeting that's happening on the 19th, I was really hoping that we would spend time understanding the law, creating committees so that we can actually fulfill the law. Unfortunately, since this has happened with the emergency situation of evacuating the young people to the adult system, it is taking precedence because it's an emergency. And that is some of the things that keep happening, right? Like there are these kind of diversions that pop up and we throw our focus on those things when holistically, if we do the work from a holistic perspective, these things would just kind of automatically happen if we're vigilant and we're evaluating and we're working in concert from the community level, which after Act 1225 was passed, we passed Act 555 that created the Children, Youth, and Planning Board. So it's a long answer. I'm trying to be brief, but there's a lot that goes into the answer. And so I think the commission works on, as the community pushes us, which is one of the reasons Flick fought to get a seat there, as an opportunity to open up the dialogue and make sure that the community has access to these systems folks that are supposed to be fulfilling the law. Hopefully I answered the question. I know, there's just so much in that answer, but the short and skinny of it is that, as a Greek philosopher said, anything that's put in motion has to be put in motion by another. So community needs to put the things in motion that they know that they need. And we have to hold these decision-making tables accountable to fulfill their missions.
Yeah, so we have a time frame allotted, so feel free to educate people so that they can have a better understanding. And I will lead you into another question. The Office of Juvenile Justice evacuated their kids from Bridge City Center for Youth to Monroe, Louisiana. What can you share about the evacuation plan? And with that in mind, considering that they're talking about they need more beds and more prisons, right?
So that's, again, a whole lot. So we looked for their actual evacuation plan as a part of their strategic plan, and haven't really found the actual plan, just that they're supposed to work on the plan. But prior to my own personal evacuation, I reached out to Bill Summers, the director of the Office of Juvenile Justice, and said, what's up, what's happening to the young people? He replied that they evacuated the youth ahead of time in anticipation of the hurricane. And then we learned that they had evacuated them to Swanson. And then we got notification that once they will return home. So looking at the OJJDP's guidance on developing an evacuation plan, that seems to follow pretty much what has been put in place, that young people need to be moved out of harm's way, and they should be moved to a youth facility. So we were able to check those boxes this time for OJJ. And let's see, you asked another question. I can't remember, I'm sorry, I'm a senior citizen.
Yeah, I'm just considering that, that they moved, they had room to evacuate kids to another youth detention as in Swanson, but yet they're trying to spend, another 20 million and build another youth facility. And I wanted to emphasize that if you have that much space, right, why is there a need to build another youth prison?
Exactly. That's the question that we're looking forward to get answered. And so let's just be clear, like Flick mission and the whole point of the juvenile justice reform was to divest in prisons and invest in community-based alternatives. The original law required that to happen. Unfortunately, a lot of the money that was slated for the Tallulah prison that we closed didn't go back into communities, rather it went back into the entire prison system, right? So if we are, if the system is doing what it was supposed to do based on the reforms, it would divest so much more money into the community and less money into building prisons. And what you stated is exactly what we're fighting about. It's like, we don't need more bricks and mortar, because if, Mr. J, you may remember they built the prison in Acadiana Parish, and it stayed closed for about a year because they didn't have good staff. So a lot of things need to go into a reform process, mostly moving on the front end. The thing I love about the Reform Act and why I stayed focused on it, it was because it was front-centered. Build what is necessary in the communities, and young people would be a lot less likely to move into the criminal justice system, right? For the reasons that we talked about earlier. And void of those things happening and all of the reforms that are supposed to be happening around making sure we have adequate public defense. You know, there's a lot of things that we can spend money on the front end to ensure that young people have an opportunity to dream and fulfill their dreams, get an equitable education, and they won't need prison at all. Evidence says that young people do much better with programs, you know, programs in the community. So I think as a group, those are the kinds of things that we need to fight for to make sure that we have the services that are necessary. And according to the Children, Youth, and Planning Boards, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna be playing alphabet soup, the CYPBs were set up for that reason. They're supposed to exist in every jurisdiction. They have all of the child serving groups, the public defender, the district attorney, you know, advocacy groups, parents, the school system. All of us are supposed to sit at the table to look at what gaps exist in programs and then hold systems accountable to create those programs, right? And so we've been working on this map and it looks really crazy and I'd have to walk folks through it, but it's just a shell to see that we're supposed to be working from the community centered, youth parent centered, right? And then share that information from the local jurisdictions to the children's cabinet. And then from there, we can make recommendations to the governor and actually to the JJRAIC. So that's a total mouthful. Maybe one day we could go through kind of the mapping so we could kind of look at the law, what was its original intent, and then where we are at this moment, and then how we can, as community, you know, work in coordination and hold systems accountable while we're all doing our individual pieces of work. Because one thing is for sure, there's enough work that all community groups can exist and coexist, right? And strategically coexist so that we are making sure we have enough services for the young people and the young people who are returning home.
Thank you. Ariel, I will turn to you. I would like to know for the audience, how many youth does the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights represent? And is there a release plan with courts or the detention center to get youths out in case of an emergency, such as, you know, Hurricane Ida?
Okay, so the number of kids that LCCR represents sort of vacillates in any given year, depending on the number of arrests that happen, which is usually between about 500 and 800 kids who are arrested. We represent the vast majority of those kids, save for those that are conflicts or hire private attorneys. Looking specifically at those kids that are in JJIC custody, which is I think what we're really thinking about when we're saying what's the situation for those kids who are in custody, especially around the time of the storm. There were about 40 kids in custody at the time of Hurricane Ida, and we represented about 50% of those kids. And the difference in sort of the statistics of the number of kids we represent for those in custody is really related to sort of the profile of the kids who remain in JJIC custody, which often there are more conflicts, and there are kids that have been transferred for prosecution to adult court, and there are also kids who have private attorneys. And so for each of those kids, we made a huge effort to push the court to consider release of them. We did that through motions to release, which are formal ways to ask for the release of the kids. And for some of those kids, we had already been filing them long before the storm because there's still kids that are in jail during a pandemic. And we urged those, we filed new ones. We, advocated every way we could to the court to try to get kids released. We found that the court didn't release the number of kids that we would expect in the time of emergency. And it did feel a little bit like all of us, we are exhausted by being in a time of crisis. And it does feel that the language about the harm and the trauma of being away from family is not as persuasive as we believe that it should be. We believe that there is a great harm done to kids when they're separated from their family during a crisis, right? That's what the studies after Katrina tell us, is that, and that's what the studies about trauma say, is that the strongest predictive factor of being able to successfully sort of overcome a trauma is being with safe and secure adults. And if we aren't prioritizing creating that, I think kids are going to be harmed in the process. As to your question, for those kids that we advocated for release for, we always are providing release plans saying this is the plan, this is where the child would go, this is the services that they would be provided, this is what the court can provide, this is what the JJIC can provide, this is what we can provide, this is what we've connected them to, this is how they could enroll in school. That's sort of the individual advocacy we can do. But I think what's also really important to think about is what is the systemic advocacy that should have been happening in advance of this. This is not the first time there has been a hurricane. It's also not the first time that it's been very clear that having kids in custody could be extremely harmful to them. Harkening back to the beginning of the pandemic, what we knew was that being in a congregate setting, especially in New Orleans at the beginning of COVID, was a high risk situation. And so kids ended up in solitary, away from their family during a time that was really, really scary. And again, what we saw is we had to push the court to have a plan for continuity of operations. Court shut down and they weren't even having continued custody hearings, which are constitutional rights for kids to have when they've been arrested for something. We had to petition to higher courts to have those hearings, for there to be a review of probable cause for the arrest of kids at the beginning of the pandemic, and to be able to argue for a bond to be set for them so their family could try to reach them to get them out of jail. And so what we've seen is there are mechanisms that we have for formal advocacy, but it's very hard to know exactly the right way to interact with the court and with JJIC during a crisis or an emergency, be it health or environmental, when we don't have a formal continuity of operations plans that's shared amongst the system actors, right? What happens and how do we together go through and say who should not be in jail or prison during this time? And how have the circumstances changed to say whatever decision and calculus was made related to the safety of the community and the determination to continue a child in detention, that changes when a child's going to be in solitary. That changes when a child's not going to receive an education. That changes when the child is going to be traumatized by being away from their family during a hard time. And that calculus needs to be integrated into a formal process where we can come together and say, let's get these kids out, because that is how we protect the kids in our community. And we know that even short periods of detention can be really harmful, right? We know that community-based solutions are what's actually going to turn around behavior. And so I think what we need is both a commitment to recognizing the harms of detention and a formal, not an ad hoc plan for how the court and the system continues to function even in times of emergency. Because if we don't have that, again, this is a time when the burden of that failure, of the adults not having that plan, that falls on the children. That falls on the children who sat, that falls on the children who went to a prison for adult men. And we need to have that. And I hope that, it's forums like this and it's other mechanisms of holding system actors accountable to say, we need to sit down, we need to have this reduced to writing. We cannot have ad hoc responses to what is a system that is systemically harming our children.
Thank you. And we're going to get to a question, and I hope that all of our guests will be able to answer. And it's just, I would like people to think about it for a little while, is that how do we, model a restorative justice process to eliminate what seems to be adversity among system stakeholders and, community and et cetera, in a way that brings us to the table in a way to resolve solutions. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Keyshawn Webster from the Juvenile Justice Intervention Center. Dr. Keyshawn, we've been having an in-depth conversation about not only the evacuation plan, but other issues and other solutions that can provide us more information on how we can do better with, in particular, Black and brown kids in our community. So welcome. I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself, and then I'll give you a few questions to answer afterwards.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson, for having me here today. Sorry I couldn't be here for the whole meeting. We had some schedule conflicts, and I still have a commitment to pick up my kids from school this evening. So I have about 15 to 20 minutes that I could spend on a call a day just to, answer any questions and to, just discuss with the group where we are with our evacuation plans.
All right, so one of the questions we had posed to you is how, and you can answer them rapidly in order. And one of the things we want to know about, what happened with the evacuation plan, where we are today, and how we can move forward. And also you can answer the question after that is, talk to us about staff retention and what causes some of the mishaps that you have running a juvenile detention facility.
Okay, so first of all, I'll just kind of recap some of the facts for everyone. JJIC has always had an evacuation plan. That evacuation plan was actually something that was in place when I was appointed here as the appointed authority of JJIC. And upon reviewing that plan, it had been around at least since 2016 was the last one of record that I could find. Every year at the very onset of hurricane season, all detention facilities are required to submit their plan to the Department of Children and Family Services for review and approval. Each year we've done that consistently. However, these plans are as good as they are when written on paper until you actually have to execute them. This was one of those rare times where we actually had to execute an evacuation. The plan always stated that if a certain category of storm was to approach, that we would evacuate the facility mainly for fear of flood waters. We know that we have backup generators here and, we shouldn't lose power, which we did lose power for this storm and the generators did not work. But with that being said, we had a plan. The plan was that DOC would take control and provide vehicles and relocate us to whatever available facility they had that would be vacant and that could be occupied temporarily by the young people. Now, this is consistent with law, Louisiana Revised Statute 15824, which states that commitment of persons to the Department of Public Safety and Correction occurs if the governor declares by executive order or proclamation pursuant to the provisions of the Louisiana Homeland Security and Emergency Assistance Disaster Act. A disaster or emergency, the department is authorized to bring into their temporary constructive custody inmates evacuated from those parishes affected by the emergency or disaster, whether the inmates are federal inmates or inmates who have been sentenced with or without hard labor, convicted of a traffic, municipal or misdemeanor offense, or are awaiting trial or as a pre-trial detainee. So this is the difference under the state of emergency, that they are the resource that is the liaison that works in coordination with Homeland Security to provide refuge to anyone that's in local, state, or federal government's custody at the time that's in an affected area. When I first got to this facility, JJIC, we explored the option of looking at other facilities in lieu of this being the only option presented at the time. And we reached out individually to a few of our neighboring parishes to see if they would be willing to house our kids in case of an emergency. One of those conversations was actually recorded in terms of a written request that actually preceded me, where a formal request was sent, and they were flat out denied and said the commission decided to table a request. But also just to highlight that, we've tried this before is, we know that in the past, before JGIC had the additional beds built to this facility, we would have problems with overcrowding, and our regulators would be down our throats in terms of making transfers of youth to OJC. And at that time, we heard the outcry from the community. It was not something that we enjoyed doing, wanted to do, but when you are the administrator and the custodian of the facility, you have to comply with state regulations to maintain a license. And even in those instances, we would reach out to all of our neighboring parishes, and we would not get the same cooperation of what's known as a courtesy hold from other agencies. And we have some suppositions and reasons we think that that is so, but that's been a reality that we've experienced, and we have reached out and tried. So to no avail, we just do not get that cooperation from neighboring parishes. So that option that the DOC provided at this time was the only option that we had. There was one other option that we looked at that I need to mention. We reached out to then Deputy Secretary of OJJ, that was Dr. James Bush. We asked him about using OJJ's facilities. After some time of exploration, he came back, and Superintendent Deshelle Williams could witness to that he reported to us that we could not use OJJ facilities because you could not mix pre-adjudication youth with post-adjudication youth. And he reaffirmed to us at that time that our best bet was to stick with the DOC implementation strategy during the storm. So to no avail, we don't have the resources in terms of a secured facility in another location that we can evacuate youth to in the case of a storm. And at this point, when Ida struck, we actually initially did not have plans to evacuate. We were going to do a shelter in place. But as we all know, that the storm came so fast that it was very hard for anyone to really make definitive decisions in terms of which plan to activate. But once we recognized that it was going to be a Category 4, it was a split-second decision made that we needed to evacuate and that we needed to get the kids to higher ground. And that's when DOC was contacted. And within about 2 hours, they sent vehicles to pick up our young people to get them out of harm's way. So 36 young people were deployed along with 28 staff. Our staff remained in charge of the operation. They occupied a facility on Hunt's campus that was not used by any other persons, groups, or anything. It was a vacant facility that was not in use at that moment, that was totally occupied and managed by JGIC staff. So you receive 3 meals a day, and our staff supervised the whole operation. On the 29th, the storm hit. After the storm hit, when the storm hit, JGIC did have a power outage, which to our surprise should not have happened. So power was out here. We had no air, we had no lights for about 24 hours until after the storm had passed, so that we could get technicians to get the power back up here. Because had the young people been here, we would not have been able to secure them with power being out, because that would have been an air circulation issue over an extended period of time. So in hindsight, we're glad that they were not at this facility at that time, because they would have been in total darkness, and they also would not have had access to air circulation and ventilation because we didn't have any power. On the 30th, once the storm had cleared up, it was the 29th, the 31st, I actually took a trip up to Hunt's to do a site inspection, because I had not gone, and we didn't know until DOC actually pulled up that they told us where we were going to be deployed to, because they were, moving other folks from other, locations. And once I actually got up there and saw the facility, and knew that our power was up, I immediately ordered our staff and youth back home. So on September the 1st, they arrived back to JJIC. And from that point on, were welcome, and we, accommodated them and got back to as normal as we could under the circumstances, while some staff was still displaced and still working on 24-hour schedules and sheltered in place at this facility until we got into recovery about a week later. So that's pretty much the key details of when we were deployed, what the plan was, what efforts had been made previously to try to get cooperation from other juvenile detention facilities, from the state OJJ system, and even after the storm, given some of the feedback that we got early on from LCCR, I communicated to Mr. Rizzio. I said, Mr. Rizzio, you got an ally in me. This is something that needs to be a joint fight, that we need to talk to the state regulators about forcing compliance for agencies to accept us and allow our kids to come to their facilities. We have no jurisdictional power to make people open their doors to us, but short of not having a plan and having history repeat the past of having our kids standing on a broad overpass, like some were post-Katrina, we would not have that happen. So we did get them safe from any threat of flood waters rising, and we brought 36 youth back safe, and we brought 28 staff back safely after that deployment. So if we had to do it again, if we had better arrangements with juvenile detention facility, we wholeheartedly agree that that is a better setup, because we all know the physical plants are totally different. So that's not even anything we need to debate. So we've never debated that, oh, this is what we preferred. We're all working outside our comfort zones when you're in a disaster situation. All over, we were without certain things and amenities that we're used to and accustomed to having in our regular everyday lives. So there's also a level of tolerance that things don't work the same when we're in disaster. But I would say our staff did a yeoman's job. We're trying to make sure our young people were comfortable. They were in communication with families and gave them the details that they could give them at the time, that we were relocating to a DOC facility. We did not disclose the exact location that they would be, because we don't do that in the best interest and safety of the young person. And while it might be something that advocates would like for us to do, we also have to consider the risk it puts staff in and the youth in when they're in transit and people know the pathways to get to certain locations. It's not a far-fetched idea to have snipers or people who are shooting at vehicles on interstates, and especially when traffic is slow moving in these kind of disaster situations. So we do not, as a protocol, as most detention facilities, when they do, they will not disclose the location of the evacuation until after that deployment is complete. Because just like we go, we have to come. And even when we're doing local transport, sometimes there are youth in custody who are high risk, who have death threats, and we have to have police escorts just to get them from our facility to court downtown. So there are some real life or death situations that we have to consider as security concerns. And just about everyone knows who has interfaced with the facility. Their children are safe here with us. We have pretty good staff who care and love our young people and also want the best for them, just like the advocates. That's why they are motivated to come and work here every day. So we are in touch with parents. We have relationships with them, and those parents, when they know that our staff are there, they do feel a level of trust and know that their children are in good hands. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, excuse me, Keyshawn, but because of the time factor, and there's one or two more questions. Thank you for your presentation, and then we hope you can stay maybe for another 10 minutes. I'm going to take another 5 minutes to ask Ariel and Gina a question, and then we will open it up, give it to Pastor Manning, and open it up for the audience to ask some questions if they want to do so. based on what Keyshawn is talking about, and based on the information we have heard from the advocates and some of the information I know firsthand, one of the things I think that needs to be done, prior to these type of storms and emergency and crisis within our community, and I'll make note that it's always a crisis with Black kids in New Orleans when you talk about the criminal justice system. So we are always in a crisis, but I think we have casual conversations, and there's no sense of urgency, right, about what we can do and how we should treat our kids. But I wanted to ask Jean and Ariel before we hand it over to Pastor Manning, how do we create a model of restorative justice and holistically, not only with the community, but with system stakeholders and, everybody who's involved or touch a kid in a way that doesn't make it cultural sensitive and utilizing cultural competence so that, we're not shouting or we're not angry with each other in a way, but we're doing this in the best interest. Because as you said, Ariel, a lot of times the adults are fighting about these issues and only the kids are being harmed by. So how do we practice this model of restorative justice and practices across the board so that we can unify our efforts to make this a better place for all of our kids?
Well said, Mr. Johnson. And I think I'd like to first start out by saying that, I appreciate the work that individuals do when they go and they report to the youth, to the prisons and the detention centers. And I have to believe that folks that are doing the work have our young people in, best interests at heart. And so none of the statements are personal. We're just talking about like actually what happened, what's in place, and what we need to do better, all of us as a team, right, to get to the point that's in the best interest of our young people. And so from the state level, what we are working on with the commission, again, is having our JJREIC look at the policies from all of the perspectives of the detention centers and the states, and look at best practice. Again, OJJDP put out what a model plan can actually look like. And so it will take all of us when we come and when we are, because personally as an advocate, when I see something that is happening that's not in the best interest of our young people, it's my duty to bring it forth, and so that we can all evaluate it and come up with something better. And it's urgent. We can't keep thinking that our young people can wait. Again, we passed reforms in 2003. We laid out a blueprint of a lot of the things that should be done from a community perspective, and how that is supposed to be then communicated to the state and then to the governor. And we're going to have to continually, when we see that our young people are afterthoughts and that they are not centered in the conversation and in the policies and the practice, and we can't continue to wait for that, right? And so we have to bring it forward and come together and develop best practice. And we can't keep saying tomorrow. We need to do a lot of those things today, yesterday, as a matter of fact.
Thank you. Ariel, you want to chime in on that, from a restorative justice practice?
Yeah. And I saw that Troy Bechet is here from the Center for Restorative Approaches. And I think that it is really important for us to think about the ways that restorative approaches should be integrated into the conversations that we're having, because we can recognize, and I think this group is well aware, that the response to the behaviors of kids will be a lot more successful if we're looking at meaningful ways to hold kids accountable and to redress the harm that was done. I do think it's really important to consider those principles and to be centering kids in our advocacy efforts. and be looking for ways for system actors to build connections, to build consensus. But I also think it's imperative that the law is followed, and that when system actors are being held accountable, that is, I think it's different in kind than when we're talking about restorative justice and restorative approaches as it relates to a response to the behavior of children. I think it's really important that we as advocates and we as members of the community are holding systems accountable to how kids are being treated and listening to kids about what their experiences are to guide that advocacy. But we need to and we must hold systems accountable.
Thank you. With that, we running a little time. I just want to let the audience know and thank our panelists for joining us tonight. October is Youth Justice Action Month. I would encourage you to get in touch with either of the organizations and see how you can lend your effort to not only supporting our children, but I would say, in my words, having the principles of restorative practices when you're dealing with any kind of injustice. And it doesn't mean that the system or the stakeholders, should not be held accountable. We must follow the law. But I think there's a way that when we're trying to restore this, that we can complement each other and get this done much easier. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Manny for questions and any other notes for tonight. Thank you for having me.
And stick with us, Ernest, and panelists. You're going to answer these questions as well as Mr. Webster. You still with us, sir?
Yeah, I have about 3 more minutes before I need to cut out.
All right, very good. Let me see if there's some questions. Sylvia, either questions in the chat or questions that you have.
Mr. Dennis Knowles is the first hand up.
All right, everyone, please try your best to sum your question up in about 30 seconds, please.
Well, first of all, I want to say it's a systemic problem. Anytime you mention $20 million to build another prison, as opposed to looking out for the welfare of the child, that means that certain entities aren't being funded to do the things or the tasks that have been suggested that you all should be doing. I say it's a governmental issue in that it starts from the top to the bottom. I want to ask you that when you talk about legislators who make these legislative decisions, then the judicial processes that keep the slavery system going without children, our youth, without any regards, I can't blame Keyshawn Webster. He's doing his job. I can't blame any of the entities that are on this program tonight. You're doing your job. This is a colonial, capitalistic, imperialistic system. It's a system of slavery. I think that we have to go about mounting our offenses in a different manner, because every time we go to the system and say that we have these problems, and then I'll bring my question real quick. We have these problems, yet and still they say, well, bring these problems to us, we will address these problems. And they never get addressed, then there's a failure within that system. It's a systemic problem, and it keeps your hope. Like I heard you, Gina. I hear you, Ariel. I hear others on the call crying out. We're following the system. We're following the protocols, but the protocols aren't working. Perhaps there's a different way that we have to approach how we go about this with our legislators, because the governor has lied. All these entities have lied. Uhuru. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Troy.
Sorry, I was struggling with getting off of mute. I want to thank you, Ernest, for raising the issue of being restorative, and for the panelists, Gina and Ariel, for speaking to those issues. And we've been having a lot of conversation about this as advocates in the juvenile justice arena, in the adult criminal legal system arena as well. And I just want to lift up that if we want our system to be more restorative, that we have to do what we've been talking about today, to find ways to be restorative in looking for solutions to these issues. And one of the things that has been talked about a lot, Gina, you for sure, and you talk about it all the time, is that solutions have to include the voice of those most impacted. And I would hope that, and I'm excited to know that there's a meeting set up with Keyshawn and Commissioner Stevens on Thursday to really hear those voices, to come together so we can prevent something harmful from happening in the future, and really look to include the community when problems come up within the system. Call the community in when those problems come up, because we come up with better solutions when we work on them together. And as a community advocate myself, I would be really honored and hold hope for better solutions if I would know that, okay, we're having this problem with the juvenile justice system. They're saying that they don't have any beds available for us. Well, let the community help you with that. Let the community voice say that's unacceptable. You have to have youth beds because the law requires that you have youth beds, and then you won't be fighting that problem alone.
Thank you, Troy. I know Mr. Webster has to go shortly.
Before I cut off, I just want to thank everyone for their concern and for raising their voices to help us address this matter. We have great partnerships and working relationships with just about all of those, most of you on this call. And you know that under this administration, we've done our best to try to have this facility manifest in the will of a lot of the reforms that this advocate community has fought for through the years. So we recognize that, we appreciate that fight, and it's made us better. And through all of what we've done over the past 3 or 4 years, we can show data to demonstrate that we heard you and we've made those changes. We also just want to, just lift up that, when we have talked to LCCR in the past, when we had challenges and we would have to transfer kids, I would talk to Erin and say, Erin, it's an unfortunate thing. I don't have any joy in doing this, but we cannot get other agencies to accept our kids. And I'll say it and I'll name it on this phone. It really comes down to structural racism and bias. This facility had a notorious past around this juvenile system network, and they see our kids as the worst of the worst, and they just don't want to accept them. But they will do that for other parishes. And that's been our experience. So this is not something that we kept from folks, even down to when we were trying to avoid having to transfer you to OJC. I would communicate with Erin. Erin, we've tried everything we could. And he will say, have you tried working with other neighboring parishes? Erin, we have done this. So this is not a secret. This is not something we kept away from any advocacy group, because if we could have done it with one, we would have done it then. And we wouldn't have had to transfer young people from OJC, from here to OJC. So there was no surprise about we did not get this type of cooperation. So I was very honest then, and I'm being honest now. It's something that we cannot change unless we get the state to cooperate. And I did write a letter to DCSF. I did follow up immediately after my initial conversation with DCSF. As I promised, Erin, I say, hey, to our regulators, we need your help. We need you to get involved in forcing compliance with this. And maybe you and OJJ need to be the cognizant agency to coordinate, not DOC. So those are some things that, we have followed up with, but we have tried to live into the will of our community advocates. We appreciate the work you do for our children and with us as partners, and we want to continue in that. So this does not have to be a fight. We're allies. We would prefer ourselves to go to a juvenile detention facility if one was made available to us. So with that, I just wanted to leave it there, and thank you all for listening. And we are allies in this, and we want to target the fight where the fight needs to be.
Mr. Webster, I know you have to go, and we appreciate you being here at Justice and Beyond. You did speak about these advocates who are for reform, and so I know you have to go, so you may not be able to hear it, but I want to give Ariel and Gina a chance to respond. Ariel, did you have a response?
Gina, you can definitely go first.
Yes, I don't know, I got there's a lot to be said. And again, I definitely appreciate, when we're all trying to work together. I do think that there is, from Flick's perspective, we were definitely surprised to hear that the young people were transferred to the adult system. as many of the families that we spoke to. And I think one of the things that from my perspective, is that every year as the hurricane season approaches, the mayor gets on the horn and the governor gets on the horn and is like, it's hurricane season, we need to have a plan. So and it's impressed upon individuals, people who live in poverty that can't really have a plan without government assistance, just all kinds of things. And the system expects us to have a plan when a hurricane comes. So like the same, my expectation is that the system would also have a plan. If I am trying to evacuate personally and my child is locked up, I would pray that I wouldn't have that as an extra thing to worry about, and that best practices would be in place, and that the discussions and the plans would be evaluated every year. And so that I wouldn't have to then later learn that my young person, my child who I had, hopefully have to entrust into the system, that they would be in a place that would follow best practice. So all of that to say is that there's an opportunity. There are tables. Again, I'm a member of the Children Youth and Planning Board. I would think that that's a perfect place where systems people should have a conversation to make sure that everyone has their emergency plans in place. And again, nothing is personal. We are assessing what actually happened after the fact. All of the things that happen should come out so that we can fix them. The only way that we can fix them is that if there is transparency and that it is brought up, and that we are having conversations to make sure our young people are safe. We all make mistakes. We all have things that we might overlook. And so when it comes to our attention, then we own it and we work together to fix it.
Thank you, Gina. Ariel?
I have little to say after Gina, but I just wanted to respond to a few of the things that Dr. Webster specifically talked about, which was decisions around the location of detention for kids that were subject to adult jurisdiction. That's a vastly different issue than children in the path of a hurricane. And there needed to be a plan for what happened to children in the path of a hurricane for a short-term evacuation for a jail of children who are subject only to the Children's Code. The citation to the law that he said does not have anything to do with kids who are in pretrial detention at the Juvenile Justice Intervention Center facing children's charges. The reason that we have a Children's Code is that because kids are different and because they needed to be treated differently. And I hear that we need to continue to work together to make sure that we have responses that take into account climate change and crises. And those plans need to follow the law, and we need to name when they don't and when kids aren't kept safe as a result of that.
Thank you, Ariel. One quick question before we move on to our next participant question. Dr. Webster said that the reason why, or the rationale behind not telling parents where the youth were being moved to was because of potential harm that could be done to them on the road, on their transport. Is the reason and the rationale that was stated is should that appease or the parents, and is that an acceptable rationale to advocates for reform?
I think it's perfectly okay that when the young people are being transported, that they are transported, that the parents know that we're evacuating, and that there isn't necessarily the date, the time, or to where. However, once the young people get to safety, parents should be notified where their children are. I think we all want to know where our children are and know that they've landed safely. As a matter of fact, reading the OJJDP best practices, it definitely states that young people should, parents should be notified. There should be a high level of transparency. And I believe, Ariel, correct me if I'm wrong, but spoke to parents and the children that were in the OJJ's custody, they were informed as to the whereabouts of their children after they arrived safely and upon their return, once they return to the facility. Parents should always be made aware of where their children are, especially in a hurricane, when they're already overly concerned about their personal safety and they cannot have the hands on to their children. As a parent, I need to know that my child has landed somewhere safe. I need to know exactly, where that is in case I want to try to reach out or whatever. And I think it's suspect that we asked a bunch of times where the young people were, and it wasn't until I feel like the media might have broke the story. So to me, I'd want to dig more into that even after the fact. It wasn't obvious. And personally, I emailed OJJ and said, where are the kids? I got an answer. I emailed Dr. Webster. I was told the young people were evacuated. When I asked where, silence.
Thank you. Ariel, did you have anything to add?
Nothing to add. I do think that Mr. Sweet from CASA really highlighted, I think, the pain of what it would be to be going through a hurricane and an evacuation and not knowing where your child is. And then once evacuated, not able to talk with them about their experiences.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Sylvia, you have another question?
They have not on a Zoom, but in the chat is several, but the time is now 6:27. I wanted to make sure you were aware.
Go ahead,
that.
take one of those questions.
Okay, Mr. VP, do you want to ask your question or do you want me to ask it?
Sylvia, you can read it.
Okay.
You can do it. You always do an excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, the question is, how would funding raised privately and government supported by reparations task force appointed by the city council and made up of community, political, and educational representatives assist in the support of community?
There was more to it. Community-centered restorative justice programs for the children and youth who were traumatized by the criminal justice system. How could the reparations task force help in funding programs?
Gina?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sorry to look on, I'm struggling with that answer. I think that whether it's a reparations task force or folks in this room, I think we could develop structures and plans and recommendations that we could, then push forward. I think we should always have some level of accountability that as to how money gets spent, and that how the money should be moved into the community. I'm not sure if I'm really answering the reparations or question or exactly, but I do feel like that should happen. And I do feel like statewide that there, again, according to the reform, there was money should have been moving to the community. So I feel like we need to be involved at every aspect, and there needs to be a lot more transparency as to how much money is moving into the community and what's really needed. I pause and hesitate and kind of cringe when we add additional task forces because it just sort of seems like, and this is just personally, it kind of muddies stuff, because then you got another group of people over somewhere having conversations when forums like this already exist. And so how can we utilize what is already existing to make the points that we need to make, if that makes sense to folks?
Yes. All right. Thank you, Gina. Ariel?
Nothing to add.
All right, thank you. Listen, everybody, we have to leave it there. We try to stick to our commitment to getting done at 6:30. We're going to do a couple of things before we end. Number one, I'm going to ask Gina and Ariel to give any closing remarks and anything they want to tell us about how you all and can get engaged in their work for reform. And then I'll ask if there are any candidates that are on the line that want to speak for about 90 seconds to introduce themselves and their platform very briefly. Then we'll close in prayer and maybe have some announcements. So, Ariel, any closing remarks?
I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here, for being engaged in this conversation at a time when I know that everyone has a lot happening in their own lives. I think that if we think about how we can protect children in our community, it's recognizing the things that are going on with kids and trying to find solutions and trying to support them to be successful and to allow them to be kids. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we see as possible solutions and possible issues. And as far as how to get involved, I think it's really doing things like this. It's being involved in Youth Justice Awareness Month. And you know, we had a lot of conversation about accountability, and we do, I believe, maybe still have a candidate on the line. And I think it's thinking about the ways that elected officials are impacting the kids in New Orleans.
All right, thank you, Ariel. Gina.
Yeah, I definitely quickly just want to thank you all for having this conversation and inviting us. There are lots of things going on from Flick's perspective for the Youth Justice Awareness Month. If I was better prepared, I would have had the links, but check out our Facebook page and check out our website for events happening tomorrow, the 19th, and all of and ways that you all can connect and participate. That would be really great for you all to come and get involved and just kind of stay connected and just kind of coordinating all of our advocacy so that we can, you know, really provide and, you know, all of the supports that our young people need.
Thank you, Gina. Appreciate all of your work, and you as well, Ariel. Dr. Johnson, you have any final words?
All I would have to say, thank you to everyone who attended tonight and to the panelists. And onward at 5, we have to keep pushing and pushing until we see the solutions and the change in our community that we all want. Thank you.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ernest. Let me ask if there are any candidates on the line that wish to share with us what they're standing for and what their campaign is all about. So are there any candidates that want to speak at this time?
Miss Sean Copeland is on. I don't know if she want to speak.
Hi, I was just waiting. How you doing, everyone? This
Go
is
ahead.
Miss Sean Copeland. I was just waiting because I know I came on after others, so I didn't know exactly who was on. So thank you for giving me this opportunity just to say a few seconds of my platform. I decided to run for City Council District E. I'm a lifelong resident of District E, born and raised, beginning in the Lower 9, went on to live in Eastern New Orleans, and after Katrina, I came back to New Orleans, living in the Lower 9, where I raised my 2 kids, 21 years old, and still raising my 16-year-old. I decided to get in this race because I'm tired of seeing the way that District E is looking like Katrina hit yesterday. Not Ida, Katrina. So we need someone that have the leadership skills that will help us to build relationships, network, remarket District E, because we need to be rebirthed in order to attract economic development, to fix our infrastructure, and of course the crime. I wasn't on the whole call tonight, but it's kind of geared around what the topic was tonight about juveniles. As I'm on the trail, I hear different people say that we need to put our kids in jail, we need to lock them up. And I don't disagree with those who need to be there. However, I just bring to many constituents' attention that they have to think about the average parent today. And I ask them when I'm talking to them, what would be the average age of a parent in their mind? And for the most part, a parent is between like 30 and under. I'm gonna say between 25 30 so years old.
30
So then
seconds,
you
Ms.
have to
Copeland.
Okay, and then thank you. Okay, and then you have to think about how old that mother was when Katrina hit. So I'm just saying that we don't need to throw our kids away. We need to provide programs and other revenues to address the things that they're doing instead of just thinking of locking them up. So I just ask for everyone's support. You can read more about me on www.votecopeland.com. And if you have any further questions for me, my contact number is 504-919-9503. I'll repeat it one more time, 504-919-9503. I would be glad to answer any questions. Or if you have someone that lives in the district who's confused or not sure or not aware of exactly what's going on or who's in the race, should I say, I would ask that you give them my number, mention my name, and I'm open to speaking with anyone. Thank you for
Ms.
giving me this
Copeland.
opportunity.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. All right. Any other candidates on the line tonight? Any other candidates wish to speak? All right, Sylvia, you seen any?
No, sir.
All right, very good. Let me
Somebody
call for
running
any.
for deputy sheriff.
Huh?
Somebody was running for deputy sheriff. I saw him come on, I thought.
No, she's gotten off.
Okay, all right. Are there any announcements or events that everybody needs to be made aware of that anyone knows about?
I would like to invite people to that lower ninth ward, which does have a few issues. We are the only group that's having an in-person night out against crime and community resource fair because our community feels it needs a community resource fair and we coordinate with Night Out. If you need a vaccination, come on by. If you've got questions about mental health, mental wellness, come on by. We are welcoming candidates, but we're not giving them a microphone. They are able to visit and hand things out. We would love to have Ubuntu there. We would love to have other nonprofit organizations. There are no sales, but there's lots of room. So.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ann. Maybe you want to drop your information in the chat if you haven't done already so people can contact you about that event. Thank you. All right, any other announcements before we close? All right, I am not hearing or seeing any, so we're going to close with a word of prayer. Let me see, I saw Reverend Jim on the phone earlier. Are you still on, sir? On the line earlier? All right, I always like to see if there are any clergy that want to lead closing
He's
prayer.
still there.
Reverend
He's
Jim,
muted.
oh.
I am here.
Hey, would you close us with a word of prayer?
Sure.
Thank you.
Almighty God, we have sung the song that Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious, precious in His sight. Help us see this precious quality of human life. Help us reach out and embrace it and make it larger for all of us. Help us build a spirit together that addresses the problems we face, particularly environmental racism, and help us make this a better world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend. We appreciate it. God bless you, everybody. We'll be actually next Monday. We will not be together. We ask that you would go and participate in the recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day on next Monday. Participate in local events, and let's show that we honor those who were here first and whose land we now reside upon. And so we will not be meeting in person. Be meeting on this platform on next Monday. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you back the Monday after that. God bless everybody. Good night.
God bless everybody.